let's cross now to Professor Scott Lucas, who's a specialist in American and international politics at University College Dublin. Thank you so much for your time. Interesting announcement there in terms of the Iranians agreeing that they will allow inspectors to come into Iran to investigate and inspect their nuclear facilities. That indeed is a bit of a breakthrough, is it not?
Not in the wider perspective. Sorry that I'm smiling here, but let's take everything that J.D. Vance said. First of all, International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors were in Iran before February 28th, 2026, when the U.S. and Israel launched the war on Iran. Now, their activities had been limited since 2018 by the Iranians, but that was because Donald Trump ripped up the 2015 nuclear agreement and imposed comprehensive sanctions. But the IAEA has still been inspecting inside Iran. You can read their quarterly reports, which quite often are, come out through the media. So we're just going back to what happened before the war. Secondly, similarly with the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz was free to everyone before February 28, 2026. Now what you have is a situation which is that it'll be reopened to shipping, is what Vance is saying, but it's going to be under Iranian oversight. The Iranians want to do this in conjunction with Oman. So in fact, Iran continues to have leverage over the strait and is a better position than it was before the war. And then thirdly, this deconfliction mechanism, which both sides have announced. The Iranians also announced this over Lebanon. Of course, the question here is how's that going to operate when Israel's trying to establish a zone of occupation in southern Lebanon? The Israelis are carrying out ongoing military operations. They just announced today that they will continue to occupy the historic and strategic Beaufort Castle. So how do you prevent Hezbollah and Israel getting into a scrap when the Israelis continue to be in part of the country? And that part is vague, even though it's being held up by both sides as, okay, there is this good progress in the talks.
So with what you've just said there, Professor Lucas, what indeed has been achieved so far in these negotiations?
Well, the Iranians have got the upper hand here. I mean, there's a Southern phrase back that we use, and forgive me for being a bit blunt on this, but J.D. Vance has put lipstick on a pig. What happened here is that weeks ago, Donald Trump and his officials accepted the Iranian agenda for these talks. And that is still the agenda that we're working off of here. So first of all, as I just mentioned, the Iranians made the priority the Strait of Hormuz because they have the leverage there. Now, in return for opening it back up to shipping, you heard J.D. Vance refer to and try to get out of this fact that the Iranians are going to get billions of dollars of their assets unfrozen, cloaking it in the idea of, oh, this is for humanitarian needs. We'll see how that pans out. The Iranians have a different version there. But remember, the Iranians are also getting a lifting of American sanctions on their oil and petrochemical products. They just said that overnight. And the Iranians have this private investment or reconstruction fund, whatever you call it, which has the prospects of hundreds of billions of dollars. So that's all in play for them going back to the status quo before the war. And then secondly, I think it's significant that on the nuclear issue, that beyond what Vance has said about the inspectors, which is just a small reiteration by Iran of the pre-war position, the Iranians have gotten the detailed discussions on the nuclear program pushed back to a later stage in the discussions. And the Iranians, I think, have got now American acceptance that they will be able to keep enriched uranium inside the country, albeit diluted to a lower level than what they have right now.
So it does appear the Americans are certainly not negotiating from a position of strength, keeping in mind that the Iranian leadership, authoritarian leadership, still remains in place, albeit with new leaders. And now that they have the leverage where they can open and close the Strait of Hormuz as they so desire.
You summarized this better than I could. The fact here is that the Israelis wanted to get regime change. They didn't get it despite the killing of the supreme leader and dozens of officials and commanders. The Americans shifted from regime change to regime surrender, trying to bomb their way to get the Iranians to capitulate on a number of conditions. That failed. Once the Americans or the Trump administration rejected putting in ground troops, which they would have had to do to get the regime out of place, they only had one other option, which is to come back to the table. And when they came back to the table, they had miscalculated. They miscalculated in two respects. One, they miscalculated Iran's retaliation on Gulf states, which meant that most Gulf states, especially the Saudis, swung towards a negotiated settlement if the Americans wouldn't put in ground troops, and they miscalculated, as you mentioned, that over the Strait of Hormuz because of the effect on the global economy.
Professor Lucas, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.